You guys are waiting. Just to give you some reference, the area we're looking at there is the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. Here we are in southwest Florida, up here on the upper left-hand part of your screen, and that is Tropical Storm Dorian on the verge of becoming a hurricane. There have been some significant changes, basically with intensity, with the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, as this looks to be a major hurricane as it approaches the coastline of Florida here this Labor Day. Just to quote the National Hurricane Center's latest advisory, and I quote, "All indications are by this Labor Day weekend, a powerful hurricane will be near the Florida or southeastern coast of the United States." So something we all kind of need to sit up and pay attention to. I know a lot of you, even here in Southwest Florida, have travel plans over the holiday weekend.
That was a #1 question so far.
I know a lot of people like to head up to Disney and Orlando, and we've got a lot to talk about here as the conditions are really going to be changing.
I see Michelle Williams. She is watching all the way from Japan. She says that it's midnight there, but her family lives here, so she's super concerned. She's trying to stay informed. In addition to all of the airport questions we have, I see a lot of people are worried. So what impacts can we see? Naples, Fort Myers, Cape Coral. It's probably our second most popular question so far.
Okay. And for those of you who are wondering, we are actually tracking two tropical storms this morning. There's Dorian and there's Tropical Storm Aric. Aric is actually closer to the southeastern coast of the U.S., but it's going to be pulling away from us. So we're going to kind of focus this Facebook Live on Dorian for sure. Trying to see if I can find how far out the tropical storm force winds extend right now. There we go. Okay. I thought the storm is growing just a little bit, up to 80 miles per hour. How many people we got? Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I think you can. We have about 230.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to do here, we're just going to kind of recap and walk you through the latest advisory with the Tropical Storm Dorian. This system is down around the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, and some big news here with this storm. It is on the verge of becoming a hurricane. I just want to say good afternoon to you. I'm meteorologist Trent Aric, and here at Fox 4, we continue to watch this storm. We've been monitoring live shots throughout the Caribbean this morning from St. John's, also St. Croix. And it looks like the conditions in Puerto Rico will be going downhill here rather rapidly. Let's get you back to that radar satellite composite, and I'll walk you through the latest that I'm seeing here. The center of circulation is right in through there, and that is just off the island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the center continues to drift off to the north. And since we talked yesterday at this time, Dorian is finally beginning to get its act together as far as strengthening and on the verge of becoming a hurricane. Earlier today, the hurricane hunters saw the development of a partial eye wall with this storm. And as this continues to drift off to the northwest, between 10 and 15 miles per hour, is going to move into a more favorable environment as it gets north of Puerto Rico and St. John. Now, you got to remember a couple days ago, the forecast track was thinking that this could possibly hit the island of Hispaniola, and that is way over here to the left. 10,000-foot mountain peaks would have ripped this small storm apart, and it missed the Mona Passage, and it looks like it's going to miss a direct hit on Puerto Rico. Now, some of the outer bands will continue to wrap in onto this eastern shore, but this storm is quickly going to move back into the Atlantic and eventually push towards the Turks and Caicos and southeastern Bahamas in the days ahead. And as it does so, it's going to be moving into an environment that is much more conducive for further development and the possibility of rapid intensification. The forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, the latest one, does indeed show this. So let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. As we go out into time here are the latest numbers as of 11 o'clock. Those sustained winds now at 70 miles per hour, just 4 miles per hour shy of becoming a Category 1 hurricane. The pressure continues to drop as well. That's one thing the National Hurricane Center is watching. Now, their latest forecast track is much more aggressive than the previous one as far as intensity. And when you're talking about the models, it follows very closely the intensity consensus. The Hurricane Center uses a blend of the HCCA model and the ship's guidance guidance to give them an idea of just how rapidly this storm could intensify. And as we look here towards as early as Thursday morning, it's going to become a Category 1 hurricane. It's practically on the verge. We're only 4 or 5 miles per hour away from that. And then in time, it starts to make this curve back just over the northern part of the Bahamas. And notice at this point, early Saturday morning, we have a Category 2 hurricane as it begins to push off towards the west-northwest. And that is where the waters are very warm. The wind shear in the mid to upper levels begins to relax. And there's this window of rapid intensification. And so for the first time, the Hurricane Center is indicating this become a major storm, a Category 3. Right now, they're forecasting winds of 115 miles per hour. And the forecast cone, remember the air at the end, that cone is some 420 miles wide, and it still encompasses all of mainland Monroe, Collier County, Lee, Charlotte, inland towards DeSoto, Arcadia towards the lake, as there is a lot of uncertainty, obviously, in 4 or 5 days. But again, the National Hurricane Center, all indications are that this Labor Day weekend will have a powerful hurricane approaching the coastline of Florida. And as far as the forecast track and where the center of that is at, there wasn't much movement, just a slight bit to the south since the last one. We're waiting for the afternoon computer models to come in. And when that does so this evening, the 5 o'clock advisory and the 11 o'clock advisory will let us know a little bit more. Lauren, what were some of the more popular questions that we can go ahead and answer?
So we have definitely a lot of people asking about flights. And so they range in days from Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So I know you obviously are going to tell everyone you need to pay attention to your airlines, but what day do you see weather being the biggest issue for their flights?
Right. Now, you got to remember, too, one of the biggest changes with the forecast and intensity, but also size. They do expect the wind field of Dorian to become much larger. Right now, tropical storm force winds only extend out about 80 miles from the center. And with a smaller storm now expected to grow, that takes the timeline of this storm and makes it a little more hard to forecast because we're not sure how big it's going to be. But we do know that right now it's at 80, and we anticipate that core to grow more than likely well over 100 miles. In either direction. And with a major hurricane moving on shore, as far as flights, typically an airport doesn't shut down unless they have tropical storm force sustained winds. And the time frame you're looking at, the center, remember a forecast cone gives you an idea where the center is going to be. This is not an impact graphic. So this is Monday morning with a major hurricane sitting just off of our coastline. So the impacts here locally could start deteriorating as early as Saturday, but it all depends upon the structure that this storm takes. Lauren, I know this is going to sound a little weird, but we've been talking this morning that if we get the situation just right, with the hurricane sitting several hundred miles away, there is the possibility that the moisture gets pulled out, we get some sinking air out around this storm, and we could actually see some fairly nice weather for Southwest Florida.
Talk about that, we did.
But that's an if. That's a big if. You get stuck under one of these rain bands, and of course, that could be for a whole different Labor Day weekend. Right now, assuming no major changes in the forecast and that the National Hurricane Center it has a perfect forecast for us, we will see minimal effects from this hurricane. We're not going to take a direct hit, that's for sure, as this one is forecast to move north near the Space Coast. You're talking Smyrna Beach, well north there of Orlando and south of Jacksonville. But it's this entire southeast Florida coastline that is still in that forecast cone from Jacksonville all the way down, as there's still some uncertainty on days 4 or 5. So everyone kind of needs to sit up and pay attention to this storm, as it's really our first test of the year. What were some of the other questions?
Yeah, Trent, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but probably the second most popular question we have is, what can people here on the West Coast, what will they experience? What do they need to prepare for? Because we see that it's going to hit the East Coast, but what about us?
Well, right now, assuming a perfect forecast from the National Hurricane Center, we're still tracking a storm that's well over 1,000 miles away from us. And as it gets closer over the next couple of days, we'll know a little more about the structure of the storm. This is what I like to say is it's easier to forecast large, powerful hurricanes when you get a large Category 4 or 5. The models have a much better handle on the storm. With a storm as small as Dorian that was forecast to impact land and that will go into an environment that's much more favorable, it gets a little complicated at times. So right now, what you need to really do at home for Southwest Florida is just kind of go through your hurricane checklist. Make sure you've got the water, you know where your can openers are at, and that you've just got your plan in place. Know where your wing nuts are for your shutters, where the keys are, and just be ready. More so for down the line. This is really a good test for us. I think what we'll see here locally, showers and thunderstorms, nothing that we can't handle or we don't do on a daily basis during the afternoon. But let's get back to that forecast track real fast, because I do want to point out again some of the timing aspects of this. As we keep talking about, we've got time. A lot of people say, oh, this forecast slowed down. It did slow down as far as the times there because they took it farther north. So it takes a little more time to work across the northern Atlantic there in the Bahamas. And I know a lot of people are planning to go to Orlando this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you get the Disney questions, the Universal. The closer you get to the storm, the more likely you are to get into those tropical storm wind fields. So especially Sunday into Monday, conditions could really begin to go downhill up around Orlando, also over on the other coast in Busch Gardens. So this is something you're going to want to watch closely. I don't maybe try to delay these plans. I know it's a holiday weekend and it's tough to get those out, but it definitely will be a much different situation in Orlando than it will be here in Southwest Florida.
No, and I think that is kind of comforting, because in addition to the questions, I am seeing people say they're so nervous about the cone. So it's really important that we're just driving home that message to just be prepared. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Off of your Facebook page. So this comes from Kesha, and she is wondering about its strength and if it will get stronger, which I believe as the updates have been rolling in, we have seen it increase a little bit.
Yeah, we have. Right now, it's on the verge of becoming a hurricane, and we expect that to happen here within the next 12 to 24 hours. There is still a hurricane warning is already in effect for the U.S. Virgin Islands, also the British Virgin Islands, and a hurricane watch for Puerto Rico. It looks like Puerto Rico is going to miss that direct hit with this storm. Now, some of the satellite and radar images that I continue to look at, the cloud pattern definitely became a little better organized during the past hours. The Air Force reconnaissance plane is currently investigating Dorian, and some of the flight level winds are seeing a 72 knot and also a peak value there around 60. So the pressure was 999 millibars in the last fix, looking at the last drops on report. So what that means is when the pressure goes down, the storms get stronger. And for what we're seeing on, again, that satellite loop, let's show you what it looks like on the infrared. What we watch for here are the really red and orange cloud tops, as that's your most severe and strongest thunderstorms. But if we flip it back over to the radar and satellite composite, this thing is becoming a little more symmetrical and is starting to look a little more like a textbook hurricane. I know it's not quite there yet, but that's definitely what it looks like. Now, once this tropical storm reaches the western Atlantic east of the Bahamas, that's where the environment becomes really favorable as the upper level wind shear disappears. So we're talking about this area right in through here, Turks and Caicos, southeastern Bahamas, and that's when we have this window for rapid development as it moves through. And you're probably looking at these clouds here saying, what in the world that's Tropical Storm Aaron. That one will be out of here rather quickly.
And I don't know if you can hear one of our team members in the back. They're talking to us. They say they have a webcam of St. Croix right now. Do you want to take that, Trent?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Okay.
Let's see what St. Croix looks like. You could definitely see the surf kicking up there. Looks like that ceiling fan's seen better days as they are getting some of the tropical storm force winds there on the island of St. Croix. That is the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some of the areas there on St. Croix have been seeing rain on and off throughout the day. And to give you a better idea where that's at on the map, we'll flip back over to the radar satellite composite, and this is St. Croix right here. So the center of what is a very strong tropical storm is passing just to the east of that island. So with the winds wrapping around, they're getting that onshore flow on the northern part of St. Croix. This is where they're getting some minimal storm surge, and the surf is rather rough, and also some heavy rain, several inches per hour as this one continues to roll through. Can we go back to that shot one more time just to kind of give a proof of what's happening there. It's sometimes better to see it with your own eyes. And right now, tropical storm force winds. Nothing, those islands they're very familiar with that, as this is the season, but this storm is going to be considerably stronger over the next couple of days, as it is forecast to be a major hurricane near the coast of Florida.
And Trent, I have two questions for you. So this one is from Anne. She said, going on a cruise out of Tampa on Sunday, is this going to affect us? Well, one, Anne, tell us where you're headed probably is one of the things that we need to know about. But then timing-wise, what do you think about that?
Sure. You know, the cruise lines are really good about changing their itineraries to avoid the storm. And with this one being over on the east coast of Florida, I'm going to assume if she's cruising out of Tampa, they usually stay in the Western Caribbean, areas around Cancun, Cozumel, maybe the Cayman Islands. So as far as rough surf and swells, usually what happens with the storm that moves through here, that wave action gets blocked by the Bahamas as it goes over the Quesal Bank and this northern shore of Cuba. So if her cruise is leaving Tampa, she's likely heading to Cozumel, Cancun, again over towards the Cayman Islands, possibly as far south as the Rotan Islands in Honduras or Belize. Yeah. So more than likely, things will be okay. And of course, the cruise line, again, does a great job avoiding the storm. If the cruise was into the Bahamas or some of the private islands that the cruise lines that leave out of Miami and Fort Lauderdale have, things are definitely going to get a little rocky in the days ahead. Cruises that head towards the Windward Islands, such as Puerto Rico and St. Lucia and Dominique, those kind of locations will definitely have to steer clear of the storm.
Speaking of Broward, Miami, you have a lot of questions on your professional Facebook page about those areas. And then Holly Madison here says, is there a chance the track of the storm could move south?
Yeah, there's always a chance. Let me go ahead and go back to that forecast cone because what this does is it tracks the center. For those of you who may be new to Florida or don't fully understand what the forecast cone represents, what it does is it takes the center of the storm. It's not an impact graphic. It doesn't take into consideration size of a storm, but this is historical. What happens is the National Hurricane Center takes their forecast year after year, and it's performance based. So over the last decade, this cone has gotten considerably smaller, but still at day 5 here, where you're seeing the category 3, where it says Monday at 8 a.m., that cone at day 5 is still 420 miles wide. And what that means is that usually about less than 66% of the time, the center of that storm is within that cone. So yes, we have seen in the past where the storm has been as far left in the cone or as far right in the cone as environmental conditions change, and especially with storms similar to Dorian, where they're weak and they're trying to get their act together, and the steering currents are really coming together in the next couple of days. 4 or 5 days is still a long time out for a storm, but right now with Florida sticking out like a sore thumb there, somewhere in Florida or as far north as you can see through Savannah and Brunswick and Georgia, and even the extreme southern parts of South Carolina, everyone kind of in this cone to watch for impact. So could it move as far south as Dade and Broward? Sure, it could, but the more reliable computer models are kind of in the center of this cone. That's where the consensus is at, and that takes it north of Cape Canaveral in the days ahead. I can guarantee you this, the forecast track will change. It always does, but this is kind of giving us all an idea of where and who needs to prepare as we go through the next couple of days. Now, the threat for Miami-Dade, Broward is pretty similar to what we're going to see here in Charlotte, Lee, and Collier County, and that's an increased chance of rain, perhaps some breezy conditions, assuming that this forecast doesn't change and it remains perfect. If the forecast track were to shift south, say far south as St. Lucie County, Indian River County, then things change. The wind percentage goes up, you get closer to that core, and of course we've got to watch to see how large the wind field will be with Dorian as it approaches, but we'll call it South Florida, whether it's Southeast Coast or Southwest. The forecast is pretty similar right now.
And it's funny you were talking about the differences in the models, because we have Miss Eichelberger here who wants to know, why is there such a difference between the models?
Well, it all kind of depends upon what models you look at. Some of them are a little more skilled than others, and some of them are tropical based. Some of them are what they call global models. They're on a little larger grid. What the National Hurricane Center does is they usually take 6 of the most reliable models and they come up with this consensus, and the center of the track you're seeing here is usually pretty close to that consensus model. So they kind of take the more reliable ones that have proven themselves in history here, and they base their forecast forecast track off of that. And one thing the National Hurricane Center is really good at, they don't what we call the windshield wiper effect. If the model runs move south in one and then north in the other, they're not going to flip-flop their forecast. They're going to trend it in a direction. And over the last day or so, that trend has been north, away from South Florida, north of the Bahamas. And so that's kind of where they've left it for now. The latest model runs will come in this afternoon. And of course, that will be taken into consideration for that 5 o'clock advisory. I think we'll know a little more on the track when that one comes in.
And then another thing that we have here that I thought was a great question. Let me see if I can find it really quickly because I'm scrolling through.
While you're scrolling,
yeah.
One question that I was actually asked this morning is, why is Dorian being steered towards our coastline? And I'm hoping I can kind of answer that question here.
And that's probably going to go piggyback off of Gary Baker's question here,
Okay.
which is what happened to the prospect of the wind shear tempering with the power of the storm?
Sure. The wind shear has been there, and it has been impeding the outflow on this western side of Dorian for a while. As it moves here towards the Bahamas, the wind shear relaxes. So in days 3 and 4, combined with the very warm waters here of the Bahamas, that's what's actually going to allow this to finally develop. Typically, this time of year, this late in the season, it's rare to see a storm that's been hampered by the Saharan dust that's been in place and also the wind shear. But as we kind of draw on an area of high pressure, we have this Bermuda high that sits off here to the north. And what we see with this is it drives these hurricanes this time of year generally in a way towards Florida. There's a little bit of a weakness in this high pressure ridge, so that's allowing Dorian to move towards the north. And as Dorian gets right here in the northern part of the Bahamas, this high pressure ridge is actually going to build back in, and as it does so, that's going to take Dorian off the northwesterly track and give it a little more of a westerly component north of South Florida. If this high pressure ridge builds in sooner, we talked about these options, why the difference in the models. Let's say this high pressure ridge builds in a little sooner, it could possibly push that storm through the Bahamas and towards South Florida. That's why the National Hurricane Center has that cone, because we simply don't know exactly how strong that high will be. But it's what I call a big game of pinball. These highs and lows move through, and the storm has to go somewhere, so it finds a weakness. It finds the path of least resistance. And in this case, right now, there's a little break in the ridge. So the storm, instead of coming over here to the island of Hispaniola and the high mountain peaks there of the Dominican Republic, it's been riding farther to the north, several hundred miles off from what it was anticipating yesterday. And without that interaction to rip that circulation apart, this storm does now have a window to rapidly intensify into a major hurricane. It'll be the first major hurricane here of the season.
And we had a comment up. We had to take it down because you were using the arrow to point, so we wanted to make sure everyone could see. So Lex Rodriguez, we don't want to ignore you. So here's his question. The models, do they update hourly? How often should he be checking?
So the models updated, depends upon which model. Some of them update every 6 hours, some of them update every 12. As far as the forecast track, what you see here on this cone graphic, the National Hurricane Center updates this 4 times a day. There are 4 major advisory packages. It comes in at 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. There are intermediate advisories in between at 8 and 2, but those usually just update watches and warnings, location, and wind speed. So the next time we will get an update on this forecast cone will be later on today at 5 o'clock, and I know Derek and Cindy will be here. They're going to walk you through everything. We'll update it on our Facebook page and, of course, fox4now.com. You guys need to download the Storm Shield weather app as well. So if you're on the go this holiday weekend, you can have everything in your pocket. You'll get the push alerts from us here. But the next time, to answer his question, that we'll see a change in this forecast track will be at 5 o'clock tonight.
And so I also know we have a look, I think, at St. John's right now if we wanted to take it. And while we're taking a look at this, I want to ask you this question because Michael Markinova, not only did he comment this, but he just messaged us on Fox 4, and he says, I really don't see an eye wall developing. Is it expected to?
Yeah, there was actually a partial eye wall that was developing this morning. Let's stay with this shot here. Again, that's St. John's?
That's our production manager. I believe Steve is back there. He said it was St. St. John's.
St. John's. Okay. So St. John's, what we're seeing there, when those palm fronds bend over like that, and you usually kind of what I call, you get half of a tree, that's tropical storm force winds. They're definitely in that core. And St. John's is part of the U.S. Virgin Islands. For those of you who may have traveled there, you have Cruz Bay, Trunk Bay to the north, and Coral Bay off towards the east. It sits just to the east of St. Thomas. So if we go to give you a little real life perspective here, we're going to zoom into areas around St. John and what they're anticipating there. And to give you an idea, St. John's is this island right there. So they are in the northern part of the strong tropical storm force core as this tropical storm, the center, is getting very close. We just talked about that eye wall. Let me go ahead and stop this on the last image and show you the radar loop. And what you're seeing here, you see this little donut? We're starting to see that hole there, Lauren?
Yep.
That is what appears to be an eye. The partial eye wall on the northern side of this was what the hurricane hunters were finding earlier today for the 5 a.m. advisory. And it does appear that this storm, based on the radar depiction and satellite, is getting a little more developed because these storms are starting to wrap all the way around. Earlier today, you could draw a line almost halfway through this tropical storm, and most of the wet weather was up here to the north, moving through St. Croix. But as this eye wall continues to drift to the northwest, we're starting to see it fill in, and this is definitely an indication that we're getting a stronger storm over the next couple of days. Let's go to the visible satellite loop. Derek Beasley has been logging in and working from home today, and this is a rather impressive view showing you those higher cloud tops. We only get the visible satellite imagery when the sun is out. Let me show you this last couple of images here to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Notice in the last few hours, if I kind of slide this back and forth, the explosion of thunderstorms right there around the center, and we'll continue to watch those flare up. So there we are about 10 o'clock this morning, and watch these clouds just explode into the upper levels of the atmosphere as these storms are rather strong as they continue to move right past St. Croix. It's really a pretty image and something that we typically start to see the eye wall on. Right now, it appears that if there were an eye to be developing, it would be right in through here, and the upper level clouds are still filling that in. When a storm is really healthy, you get that clear circle, you get that exhaust coming in from the center of a storm. At this point, Dorian's simply not there yet, but it is on the verge of becoming a weak hurricane. Once it becomes a major hurricane off our coastline, we'll see a much different representation there on the satellite view.
And I think Becky Warren here, she is wondering, she's on your professional Facebook page. I'm trying to go back and forth, stay balanced between everyone. Becky is wondering, when will we feel the effects on the East Coast and then the West Coast?
Sure. Now, considering this is South Florida, so we'll talk maybe Palm Beach County down. We'll call South Florida Southwest and Southeast. So Palm Beach, Dade, Broward, Lee, Collier, Charlotte. We could start seeing conditions go downhill for us with some rain bands and cloud cover moving through as early as, I think, Sunday morning is really the time. Saturday is going to be the better day of the two, but you have to remember too, there's plenty of tropical moisture in place. We're going to see the daytime heating, and with the atmosphere unstable, we're still going to see a high chance of rain, but there's so many question marks on exactly how big Dorian becomes and where that sinking air lies that the forecast really has more uncertainties than it does knowns as we're heading through the weekend. We kind of cover both bases there, but it's simply because this system is developing and it has the potential to do so rather rapidly as it moves a little closer to us. But I think right now, if you're planning out your timeline, it looks like Sunday is when we could see our conditions kind of deteriorate here.
And Trent, I do want to say some people are saying thank you. Michael, for example, said thank you for answering his question. We're still waiting for more questions to roll in. I see a lot of you are watching, though. So Wendy is watching, it looks like, from Louisiana. So thank you. And Kathleen is in Tennessee. Debbie, St. Augustine. So really, if you guys have more questions, please roll them in. And thank you for watching. I'm just giving Trent a second to catch his breath and to update his graphics. Let's see what Nicole has here. She's wondering about the likelihood of it hitting Georgia.
Georgia, I don't think is going to have a problem because the computer models, and just giving some perspective here, Lauren, I saw one question, how far away is the storm? It's a little over 1,000 miles here from South Florida, judging on the East Coast. So we still, like I said, a long ways to watch this storm. Just to answer your question about Georgia and the Southeast, sometimes we do have to watch these tropical storms and hurricanes because the high pressure ridge can push them across the state back into the Gulf where they can strengthen before they move in. Now, Georgia, and I guess I should kind of rephrase my answer to that. Coastal Georgia, Savannah, Brunswick, areas maybe as far inland as Macon and Tifton, those areas could see some fringe effects because right now the hurricane is forecast to get in the northern part of the state, and some of the long-range computer models with high uncertainty take this storm and kind of turn it back to the north along the coastline of North Florida to Jacksonville on up through the Carolinas. So if you're in Georgia and kind of watching the system, especially along the coast, you'll need to watch it closely here for the next couple of days. But Lauren, I think that's about all we have for now.
You've been here since about 2 or 3 in the morning forecasting this and keeping track of Dorian. So I think we should let you take a little break.
And right back at you. And of course, if you're joining us on Facebook and you live here in Southwest Florida, make sure to tune in tomorrow morning. Lauren will be back with me. We'll have Lisa and Chris, and we're going to walk you through the very latest on Dorian. Our morning news is from 4:30 to 9. And tonight, Derek and Cindy will be in. They'll walk you through the latest. And if you live out of the area, you can download Roku. I believe we're on Amazon. You can download our app. You can watch us live anytime. But until then, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to send in your questions. And we'll be here through the next couple of days. Hopefully we can do it and hopefully we can all stay safe and at least prepared here for the storm. Thanks a lot.